thrive. And
Now,
so we will have to do a lot of work
now,
to make sure that we are strengthening our communities.
now, in spite of all the talk ahead of the election, Vice President Harris only lost 2 points among black voters nationally in comparison to President Biden in 2020. An overwhelming 85% of the black vote still supported Harris nationally, despite predictions to the contrary. What role is the Congressional Black Caucus going to play in making sure their voices are represented?
Well, we have to make sure that we are in every portion of this nation. First of all, making sure that our people are educated about what we are about to experience with this administration. We need to make sure that they are strengthened and undergirded in terms of programs, whether it's at the municipal or state level, that can help them to weather what will be predicted to be a storm. And we have to, I believe, leave the confines of Washington, D.C. to build common cause out there in this nation, on the ground, where people live, where people are hurting, and where people have been either deceived or disillusioned by what has taken place in this 2024 election.
You were warning before the election that our country was not prepared for the level of disinformation being spread online, and in particular, the problem of artificial intelligence and deep fakes. The Center for Digital Hate found false or misleading claims made by Elon Musk on his X platform had 2 billion views. What role do you think all of this had on the election?
It had a profound impact. There's no doubt about that in my mind. We are all hardwired on a virtual life, which includes the consumption of news through social media platforms, some of whom have no integrity to the claims that they make. And unfortunately, it's an addiction to a large extent for many individuals in our nation to not fact check, but to, again, consume what they're being fed through information or disinformation on a daily basis. That is going to have a profound impact on the way that people view and the world around them, the civil society that we live in. And it can be extremely disruptive, as we've seen with this election.
Now, Trump and his allies campaign on a plan to detain and deport migrants on a mass scale. Many are trying to calm fears about of who exactly will be forced out of the country and when. As co-chair of the Haiti Caucus, you've been fighting for the rights and protections of the community, including those in Springfield, Ohio, who were singled out by Trump during the campaign. How concerned are you about the mass deportation risk now, and what have you been hearing from the community and also from business leaders about how a mass-scale deportation could even financially and logistically even work?
Well, let me say this, that this has sent shockwaves through immigrant communities across this nation. There were those who were awaiting the ability to adjust their status, like our DACA recipients, those who may have temporary protected status for quite some time now in this nation. And they held on to the hope that their productivity, their support of our country would yield better outcomes for them. Clearly, that has all changed and stopped on a dime. The type of rhetoric that we heard during the Trump campaign leaves us with no alternative way of thinking other than to realize that these folks will try to follow through on what some view as a threat to many of our families who are, quite frankly, of mixed status, and that the cruelty is always the point here. The idea is that if we drive enough fear into these communities, if we take on draconian measures to remove individuals from our communities, one, it will cause mass confusion in many communities across this nation, and second of all, it will be disruptive to our economy. We are all keenly aware of the role that immigrants play in our economy. And for small businesses, for businesses across this nation, it will be extremely disruptive to have a plan, a poorly thought out plan around deportation and mass deportation taking place in the United States of America.
And we have to deal with the logistics, as I said. One, how much will this cost, if it's even possible to find out who's here legally and illegally, and whether the countries you're talking about deporting them to will even allow us to bring them there. But let me go closer to home. Firefighters extinguished a second brush fire last night in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York, which runs along the western border of your Brooklyn district. New York City and New Jersey have been placed under red flag warnings and air quality alerts as nearly a half dozen wildfires have broken out across the region amid a historic drought. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported Friday the incoming administration is planning to once again withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord and reshape the agencies responsible for protecting the nation's environment. All of this while we're seeing unprecedented natural scales of massive scale in places that we haven't even seen before. Is the Republican denialism on climate sustainable in a situation that seems to be escalating like this?
Well, let me say this, that we have seen a consistent pushback and denial of climate change and its impacts from colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I don't anticipate that changing. For many, this is an economic imperative. In other words, for the fossil fuel industry and those who feed off of it, to be in denial is to be enriched. Unfortunately, for those of us who are on the ground in our communities here in an urban area like Brooklyn, New York, we are seeing what drought conditions can mean right here in the city of New York. We're talking about perhaps even moving to a point where we're going to have to ration the amount of water that we use on a regular basis. Our reservoirs are running low. And so this is not only happening in remote parts of the country, but in every community we will see the impact of climate change. And if we continue down the path of denial, it will only get worse.
All right. Thank you for joining us this evening, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. Joining me now is Congresswoman Shontel Brown, Democrat of Ohio, and Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat of New York. My thanks to both of you for joining us. Congratulations on your re-elections last week. Congresswoman Brown, starting with you. You just heard me with Congresswoman Clarke. Black voters came through for Democrats despite Trump's gains elsewhere. What would you say is the role of the Black caucus for those voters with Trump returning to the White House?
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Al. And I would say this, that the CBC is not going anywhere. We're going to be there on day one, holding this administration accountable. Let's be clear about what happened. And Trump did gain some Black voters, but he did not win Black voters. Black voters voted for Vice President Harris overwhelmingly. And I respect the choices that the voters made, and I think that Black voters that chose Trump this time will be disappointed. The fact of the matter is Trump has never delivered on his promises to anybody. So the CBC will continue to be the conscience of the Congress and the country.
And I might add there was overblown predictions that there'll be deeper inroads of Black voters for Trump, and that did not happen. Even with Black men, it was marginal in terms of the increase. But New York has been a reliably blue state for decades. Congressman Goldman, the vice president, won New York State, though she underperformed compared with Joe Biden in 2024, while Trump vastly improved his numbers at the state level. And here in the city where he made gains in every borough, including Manhattan and Brooklyn, which make up your district. How do you explain this shift?
Well, I think that we're going to have to do a real deep dive into some of the reasons why, especially because we did flip 3 House seats from Republican to Democrat in the election last week and gained back almost all of those that we had lost in 2022. So it is not entirely that the Democratic message or the local message that we have as a party is wrong. When you look at what our policies are, they are consistently in supporting working families and trying to reduce the income gap, the wealth inequality that exists in our country. But we did not do a good enough job of messaging that and making that the center of our platform for this election. Donald Trump got away with many lies. I heard you talking with my friend, Congresswoman Clark, about a lot of the disinformation, and there was rampant lies about what Donald Trump did in his first term and what he plans to do in his next term. But regardless, we did not do a good enough job of meeting the American people where they were, explaining to them how we are for them, and we are trying to lift up all Americans with policies that give everyone access to the American dream.
Now, Congresswoman, Donald Trump has now won a presidential election in Ohio 3 times in a row, following Barack Obama's successive wins in Ohio a little over a decade ago. Longtime Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, who we had on the show just last week, just lost his reelection race to MAGA Republican businessman Bernie Moreno. And Senator J.D. Vance's seat will get filled by an appointee of the state's Republican governor, Mike DeWine, until a special election is held in 2026. Now, how do Democrats regroup, Congresswoman?
Well, I will tell you, Tuesday's results was painful in Ohio. We clearly have a lot of work to do to rebuild and come back. But the fact of the matter is, Rev, when you think about my colleagues like Amelia Sykes and Marcy Kaptur, who were able to prevail during this red wave in tough districts, it shows that we can still win in Ohio. So you often hear me say, in the words of our former chairman of the state party, is that Ohio is more rigged than it is red. These districts are drawn in such a way that they don't lend themselves to very competitive districts. And I think it also is important to note that there was a lot of voter suppression here in Ohio. I know that people stood in line for at least 4 hours the last Sunday of early voting. The fact that people had to endure such obstacles and barriers to have their ballots cast and counted is discouraging, particularly to marginalized communities. So yes, there's some work to do. I won't try to play political pundit as it relates to what happened, but I do think we need to take those things into account, because this was an historic election, and we're going to have to take a deep, hard look at what we can do differently moving forward.
Congressman Goldman, you're a former federal prosecutor. You served as counsel to House Democrats during Trump's first impeachment. NBC is reporting